The ancient brick building loomed ahead of me as I stepped off the city bus, clutching my backpack straps like a lifeline. Westlake High School, my new educational home in the heart of New Orleans. Mid-October wasn't exactly an ideal time to transfer schools, but Dad's job relocation hadn't given us much choice in the matter. I hesitated at the bottom of the worn stone steps, taking in the 3-story structure that seemed to belong more in a Gothic novel than in the present day. The building had character, as my mother would diplomatically say. Weathered red bricks, tall arched windows, and an ornate clock tower that hadn't worked in what looked like decades, judging by the permanently frozen hands. The smell hit me next. That distinct mixture of old books, floor polish, and something else I couldn't quite place. Something older. Damp, perhaps. I made my way through the heavy wooden doors into a lobby that hadn't been updated since at least the 1970s. My shoes squeaked against the polished hallway floor as I followed the signs to the administrative office. Every step I took across those wooden boards produced a protesting groan, as if the building itself resented my intrusion. The halls were lined with trophy cases and faded photos of graduating classes dating back nearly a century. Madison Rodriguez? The secretary looked up from her computer as I approached her desk. "We've been expecting you, honey. Welcome to Westlake." The morning passed in a blur of introductions, confused wandering through unfamiliar hallways and trying to look like I knew what I was doing. The usual new kid routine. By the time lunch rolled around, my brain felt stuffed with new information, locker combinations, teacher names, and the complex geography of a building that seemed designed by someone with a twisted sense of humor. Hallways that should have connected didn't. Staircases appeared where you least expected them, and room numbers followed no logical sequence I could discern. I walked toward what I hoped was the cafeteria, following the increasing volume of teenage voices. The hallway stretched ahead of me, lined with dented lockers and framed black and white photographs. As I turned the corner, I stopped abruptly. A boy stood at the far end of the corridor. He wasn't moving, just standing there, facing away from me. Something about him seemed off, though I couldn't immediately place what. His posture was too rigid, too formal, and his clothes... I squinted, trying to make out the details. He wore some kind of uniform, navy blue with brass buttons down the front and along the cuffs. It looked like something from an old military academy or a private school from decades ago. Definitely not what the other kids at Westlake were wearing. "Hey!" I called out, my voice echoing slightly in the empty hallway. The boy didn't respond, didn't move, didn't give any indication he'd heard me. I took a few steps closer, my footsteps loud against the wooden floor. "Excuse me? Do you know where the cafeteria is?" He started to turn, slowly, too slowly. I caught just a glimpse of his profile, pale skin, dark hair, and then I blinked. He was gone. I stood frozen, staring at the empty space where the boy had been just a second before. People don't just disappear. I looked around wildly, checking doorways and alcoves, but the hallway remained empty except for me. A chill ran through my body despite the stuffy air. I must have imagined it. Or maybe he ducked into a classroom while I blinked. That had to be it. I hurried toward the sound of clattering trays and teenage chatter, eager to rejoin civilization and shake off the weird feeling that had settled over me. The cafeteria was packed with students, their conversations creating a wall of sound that somehow made me feel more alone than the quiet hallway had. I got in line, grabbed a tray of something the lunch lady assured me was jambalaya, and scanned the room for an empty seat. The familiar anxiety of lunchtime as the new kid washed over me. Where to sit? Who might be welcoming? Who might be annoyed by my presence? "You can sit here if you want." I turned to find a girl with blonde hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. She wore a simple blue hoodie and had alert eyes that seemed to be constantly scanning the room. "Thanks," I said, sliding into the seat. I'm Madison Rodriguez, first day. Marcy Johnson, she replied with a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Welcome to the swamp. The swamp? That's what we call this place. Old, damp, and full of things that might bite you. She laughed, but there was something tight about it. How's your first day going? I pushed the jambalaya around my plate. Fine, I guess. Still trying to figure out where everything is. This building makes no sense. Yeah, it takes a while to learn your way around. The West Wing is especially tricky. They added it in 1930-something and never quite got the floors to line up right. I nodded, then hesitated, wondering if I should mention my strange hallway encounter. The rational part of my brain said I'd just seen a student duck into a room, but something about it felt wrong. Hey, is there some kind of special program here? Like students who wear uniforms? I asked as casually as I could manage. Marcy paused, her fork halfway to her mouth. Uniforms? What kind of uniforms? I saw a boy in the hallway wearing this old-fashioned Navy uniform with brass buttons. Looked like something from an old movie. The change in Marcy's expression was immediate and alarming. All the color drained from her face, and her eyes widened with what looked unmistakably like fear. Where? She asked, her voice dropping to just above a whisper. Where exactly did you see him? In the east hallway, near the row of black and white photos. Why? What's wrong? Marcy's hand shot across the table and grabbed my wrist, her fingers digging in with surprising strength. Did he see you? Did he look at you directly? No, I don't think so. He started to turn around, but then he was just gone. I blinked and he vanished. I tried to laugh it off. I probably just didn't see which room he went into. Marcy wasn't laughing. Her grip on my wrist tightened painfully. Listen to me, she said, her voice urgent and low. This is important. There are things about this school you need to know. She released my wrist and began digging through her backpack, eventually pulling out a folded, crumpled piece of notebook paper. She smoothed it out with trembling hands, then pushed it across the table toward me. You need to memorize these. Right now. And never, ever break them. I stared down at the paper. Written in neat handwriting was a numbered list. 1. If you see a student wearing a uniform that doesn't match the current dress code, do not approach them or acknowledge their presence. 2. If you hear crying in any of the bathrooms, do not enter. Use the facilities on another floor. 3. If you hear footsteps behind you in an empty hallway, do not turn around more than once. Walk directly to a populated area. 4. If someone you don't recognize asks you to follow them anywhere, refuse and find a teacher immediately. 5. Never remain in the building alone between 3:14 and 3:16 p.m. 6. If a teacher you don't know approaches you after school hours, do not go with them regardless of what they say. I looked up at Marcy, waiting for the punchline. Is this some kind of new kid hazing thing? I wish it was. She leaned forward, her voice dropping even lower. I'm dead serious, Madison. This isn't a joke. These rules could save your life. I stared at her, trying to decide if she was messing with me or genuinely disturbed. The intensity in her eyes made me uncomfortable. I started to fold the paper to put it away. I don't understand. What are these rules even for? Why would I need? The words died in my throat as a sudden coldness settled over me. The cafeteria noise seemed to dim, as if someone had turned down the volume. The hairs on my arms stood up. Someone, was standing directly behind me. I turned slowly in my seat, a strange reluctance making my movements sluggish. The boy in the Navy uniform stood there, close enough that I could have reached out and touched him. His skin was unnaturally pale, almost bluish, and his dark eyes seemed to contain no light at all. Just empty pools that stared directly into mine. His uniform, which I now saw clearly was indeed old-fashioned, with tarnished brass buttons and a style that hadn't been worn by students in at least 60 or 70 years. Up close, I noticed something else. The edges of his form seemed slightly blurred, as if he wasn't quite solid, and despite standing under the harsh fluorescent lights of the cafeteria, he cast no shadow on the floor. Marcy screamed. The sound seemed to come from very far away, though she sat just across the table. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, could barely breathe as those dark, empty eyes held mine. That's enough. The commanding voice broke the terrible silence. Mr. Green, my new history teacher, strode toward us with purposeful steps. Tall and imposing with salt and pepper hair and rectangular glasses, he positioned himself between me and the boy. "You need to leave," Mr. Green said firmly to the boy, his voice calm but unyielding. "Not here. Not now." The boy's gaze shifted from me to Mr. Green. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, like smoke dispersing in a gentle breeze, the boy's form began to blur and fade until there was nothing there at all. I sat frozen, staring at the empty space where the boy had been, trying to make sense of what I'd just witnessed. I couldn't get the image of those empty, dark eyes out of my head. All night I'd tossed and turned, my dreams full of brass buttons and blurry edges, and the way Mr. Green had made that thing disappear. I kept trying to convince myself there was a logical explanation, but logic didn't explain how a boy could vanish into thin air. My first class passed in a haze as I replayed yesterday's events. The list Marcy had given me sat folded in my pocket. I'd read it at least 20 times since yesterday, wondering if my new classmate was playing an elaborate prank or if Westlake High School was actually... No, I couldn't even think the word. Ghost stories were for campfires and sleepovers, not real life. As I gathered my books for second period English, I realized I needed to use the bathroom. The closest one was on the second floor, just around the corner from my classroom. I headed that way, still distracted by thoughts of Navy uniforms and rules written on crumpled notebook paper. I was reaching for the bathroom door handle when I heard it. Soft at first, then growing louder. The unmistakable sound of a child crying. Not a teenager, but a young child, maybe 5 or 6 years old. My hand froze mid-reach. Rule number 2 from Marcy's list flashed in my mind. If you hear crying in any of the bathrooms, do not enter. Use the facilities on another floor. I backed away from the door, my skin prickling with goosebumps. The crying intensified, becoming more desperate, heart-wrenching sobs that made my chest tighten. It sounded so real, so pained. "Hello?" I called out, immediately regretting it. "Is someone hurt in there?" The crying stopped abruptly. Complete silence followed for 3 long seconds. Then came a small voice, high-pitched and wavering. "Help me, please help me." Every instinct told me to push open the door and help whoever was inside. But the image of the boy with no shadow flashed in my mind. I took another step back, then another. "I can get a teacher for you," I offered, my voice shaking. The crying resumed, louder this time, transforming into a wail that didn't sound entirely human. There was something off about it, too rhythmic, too calculated. It rose and fell in a pattern that made my skin crawl. "Please," the voice begged. "I'm all alone." I turned and walked away, each step harder than the last. The crying followed me down the hallway, somehow getting louder even as I put more distance between myself and the bathroom. I picked up my pace until I was practically jogging toward the stairwell. I used the bathroom on the first floor instead. It was completely empty and silent. When I returned to class, I couldn't focus on anything the teacher said. All I could think about was that small, pleading voice, and how wrong it had felt. What would have happened if I'd opened that door? 3 hours later, I'd mostly convinced myself I'd overreacted. Maybe there really had been a lost child, or perhaps an upset student. The weird acoustics of the old building could explain why the voice sounded strange. I was letting Marcy's rules and yesterday's bizarre encounter mess with my head. I headed to lunch, ready to find Marcy and demand better explanations. The hallway leading to the cafeteria was empty, most students already inside eating. My footsteps echoed against the wooden floor as I walked, creating that hollow sound unique to old buildings. Then I heard it, another set of footsteps behind me. I turned, expecting to see another student or teacher. The hallway stretched empty behind me. But the footsteps continued. Step, step, step. I stood frozen, listening. The steps were slow, deliberate, and getting closer. Rule number 3. If you hear footsteps behind you in an empty hallway, do not turn around more than once. Walk directly to a populated area. I had already turned once. The rule said not to turn more than once. Why would that matter? What would happen if I turned again? The footsteps quickened their pace, growing louder, closer. I couldn't help myself. I spun around again. Nothing was there, but the footsteps kept coming. They sounded heavier now, with a strange dragging quality, like someone pulling an injured leg. Fear shot through me like an electric current. I broke into a run, heading straight for the cafeteria doors. The footsteps matched my pace, breaking into a run as well, faster and faster, closing the gap between us. Something cold brushed against the back of my neck. I slammed through the cafeteria doors, nearly tripping over my own feet. The noise and warmth of the crowded room hit me like a wall. Dozens of students sat eating and talking, completely normal, completely oblivious. The footsteps had stopped. I stood just inside the entrance, breathing hard, my hands shaking. No one seemed to notice my panic. I glanced back at the doors, half expecting to see someone, or something, burst through after me. "You all right, honey?" I turned to find Mrs. Lottie Howard watching me from behind the lunch counter. She was a heavy-set older woman with warm brown skin and observant eyes. She wore the standard cafeteria uniform with a colorful cardigan over it. I hadn't spoken with her before, but I recognized her from yesterday's lunch service. Something in her expression told me she understood exactly what had happened. My voice cracked. I heard footsteps behind me, but no one was there. Without a word, Mrs. Lottie lifted the counter divider and walked out into the cafeteria. She moved with surprising grace for her size, coming to stand beside me. She positioned herself between me and the hallway doors. "You stay right here with me for a minute, child," she said, her voice gentle but firm. She began to hum, so softly I could barely hear it at first. It was an old spiritual song, one I vaguely recognized but couldn't name. As she hummed, her eyes remained fixed on the cafeteria doors, watching and waiting. The temperature near the doors seemed to drop. I could see my breath forming small clouds in the air, though no one else in the cafeteria appeared to notice anything unusual. Mrs. Lottie's humming grew slightly louder, her rich voice carrying power in each note. The melody felt ancient and somehow protective, like a shield being woven from sound. We stood that way for nearly a minute, her humming and watching, me trying not to fall apart from fear. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the cold spot near the doors disappeared. Mrs. Lottie's shoulders relaxed slightly and she ended her song. "It's gone now," she said simply, turning to look at me. "You remembered the rules, that's good. But you turned around more than once, didn't you?" I nodded, embarrassed and confused. "How did you know? And what was that?" Mrs. Lottie patted my arm. "There are things in this school that don't follow the same rules we do. Some are just lost. Others are more persistent." She looked me directly in the eyes. "You're safe to go now, but always remember those rules, Madison. They're not suggestions, they're survival." She gave my shoulder a gentle squeeze before returning to her position behind the lunch counter, leaving me standing alone with more questions than answers, but somehow knowing I'd just been protected from something I couldn't begin to understand. That same afternoon, I tried to focus on schoolwork to distract myself from what had happened with Mrs. Lottie in the cafeteria. Between the boy in the uniform yesterday, the crying in the bathroom, the invisible footsteps, and Mrs. Lottie's protective humming, I felt like I'd stumbled into some kind of waking nightmare. But I had a history project due Friday, and supernatural weirdness or not, I didn't want to fall behind in my first week. The library seemed like the safest place to hide out for a while. It was quiet, well lit, and filled with other students. Safety in numbers, right? The Westlake High Library occupied most of the East Wing's first floor, with tall windows and wooden shelves that reached nearly to the ceiling. It smelled like old paper and furniture polish. I found a secluded study table tucked between the history and literature sections, surrounded by books with cracked spines and faded covers. Perfect. I spread out my notes and textbook, determined to make progress on my Louisiana history project. For about 20 minutes, everything was normal. The only sounds were pages turning, the occasional cough, and the soft tapping of keyboards. I actually managed to get lost in reading about the 1815 Battle of New Orleans, forgetting momentarily about vanishing boys and phantom footsteps. Then the temperature dropped. It wasn't gradual. One moment I was comfortable, and the next I could see my breath forming little clouds in front of my face. My skin prickled with goosebumps, and the air felt dense, like it had gained weight. Something was wrong. I slowly looked up from my textbook, the hair on the back of my neck standing on end. He stood near the biography section, about 30 feet away. A tall man in a formal black coat and pants that looked straight out of the 1800s. He wore a black top hat that added to his already imposing height, and one hand gripped a silver-headed cane. But it was his eyes that made my stomach twist, gray and piercing, fixed directly on me with an intensity that felt physical, like being pinned to my chair. Unlike the boy in the uniform, there was nothing confused or lost about this man. His gaze was deliberate, calculating. He knew exactly what he was doing. The man took a step forward, tapping his cane against the wooden floor. The sound echoed much louder than it should have. Tap, tap, tap. Rule number 4 flashed in my mind. If someone you don't recognize asks you to follow them anywhere, refuse and find a teacher immediately. He hadn't spoken yet, but everything about his posture and gaze said he wanted me to come to him. I started gathering my books with shaking hands, trying not to make eye contact again. My notebook slipped from my fingers and papers scattered across the floor. When I looked up, he'd moved closer. Much closer. How had he crossed 15 feet so quickly? I hadn't even heard his footsteps. Tap, tap, tap. His cane struck the floor with each slow, deliberate step. I abandoned my fallen papers and grabbed my backpack, clutching it against my chest like a shield. My heartbeat felt strangely loud in my ears as I backed away, bumping into a shelf behind me. The man's thin lips curved into what might have been a smile, but there was nothing friendly about it. The temperature dropped even further, and I swear the lights dimmed slightly. I turned and rushed toward the front desk, no longer caring if I looked crazy. The man's cane tapped faster behind me. Tap, 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 tap. Ms. Trevors sat at the circulation desk, her auburn hair pulled back in a neat bun. She looked up as I approached, and her expression immediately changed from professional politeness to sharp concern. "Ms. Trevors," I said, my voice coming out as a whisper. "There's a man." Her eyes focused past me, narrowing slightly. She stood up quickly, removing her glasses. "Madison, go to my office," she said calmly, gesturing to a door behind the desk. "Wait for me there. Don't come out until I get you." I hesitated, looking back over my shoulder. The man in the top hat had stopped about 10 feet away. He stood perfectly still, his gaze now fixed on Ms. Travers instead of me. "Now please," Ms. Travers said, her voice firmer. I ducked behind the desk and into her office, closing the door behind me, but leaving it cracked open just enough to peek through. Ms. Travers walked directly toward the man, her steps quick and confident. When she reached him, she spoke in a low, authoritative voice that I couldn't quite make out. What I could see was her stance. Straight-backed, chin raised, one hand touching what looked like an iron bracelet on her other wrist. The man towered over her, but Ms. Travers didn't back down. She continued speaking, her voice never rising but somehow carrying power in each syllable. The lights in the library flickered once, twice, and I heard what sounded like books falling somewhere in the stacks. I wanted to see more, but a strange haze seemed to fill the space between them, making it hard to focus. I closed the door fully and waited, counting the seconds in my head, trying to calm down. The office was small but neat, with a desk covered in papers and a small bookshelf packed with texts that looked far older than the ones in the main library. I noticed small objects placed strategically around the room, an iron horseshoe above the door, a small dish of what looked like salt on the windowsill, and several strange symbols drawn on pieces of paper and pinned to a corkboard. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 5 minutes, the door opened. Ms. Travers entered alone, adjusting her cardigan and looking slightly tired, but otherwise normal. "He's gone now," she said simply, as if she'd just asked a rowdy student to quiet down. "You can come back out." I followed her into the main library area. The chill in the air had disappeared completely, and the man in the top hat was nowhere to be seen. Other students continued working, apparently unaware of what had happened. Was that... I hesitated, not knowing how to finish the question. "Some visitors aren't welcome in my library," Ms. Travers said, reaching into her pocket, "especially ones who don't follow the rules of common courtesy." She pulled out a small object and pressed it into my palm. It was a simple bracelet made of twisted iron wire with a small cloth pouch attached. "This contains iron filings and salt," she explained quietly. "Keep it with you, especially in the older parts of the building." I stared at the makeshift charm, then back at Ms. Travers. What did he want? Ms. Travers glanced around to make sure no one was listening. Some of them just want attention, others want something more. She adjusted her glasses. "The important thing is that you remembered the rules and sought help. That's what they're for." She helped me gather my scattered papers and books. As we worked, I noticed her watching the shadows between the bookshelves carefully, as if expecting the man to reappear. "Thank you," I said when we finished, "for helping me." Ms. Travers nodded. "The library is my domain. I don't tolerate bullies of any kind here, living or otherwise." She gave me a small smile. "You should be fine now, but perhaps finish your research another day. Some encounters can be draining." I nodded, suddenly aware of how exhausted I felt. The bracelet felt cool against my wrist as I slipped it on, and despite its simple appearance, I felt somehow safer wearing it. As I walked out of the library, I glanced back to see Ms. Travers watching me go, her hand resting on what looked like an old book bound in dark leather. I couldn't read the title from where I stood, but the serious expression on her face told me everything I needed to know. What had happened wasn't over, and the rules I'd been given were only the beginning. The iron bracelet Ms. Travers had given me felt cool against my skin as I worked on my art project the next day after school. The art room smelled like acrylic paint and clay dust, comfortingly normal after everything I'd experienced in my first days at Westlake. I'd chosen to stay late to work on a landscape painting of the Mississippi River for my introductory art assignment, partly because I wanted to make a good impression, but mostly because focusing on blending blues and greens helped quiet my thoughts about vanishing boys and men in top hats. The afternoon light slanted through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the empty tables. Everyone else had left, even Mrs. Chen, the art teacher, who told me I could stay as long as I locked up when I finished. The solitude felt peaceful rather than threatening. I lost myself in adding tiny white caps to the waves, trying to capture the movement of water with each brushstroke. I only stopped when my hand started to cramp. Stretching my fingers, I looked up at the old analog clock above the blackboard and felt a jolt of alarm. It was exactly 3:14. Rule number 5 from Marcy's list flashed in my mind: never remain alone in the building between 3:14 and 3:16 p.m. Crap, I muttered, quickly setting down my brush. I grabbed a paper towel to wipe my hands and started shoving supplies into my backpack, not bothering to clean my palette properly. The peaceful feeling had vanished, replaced by a creeping unease that made my skin prickle. I didn't know what happened at 3:14, but after the footsteps in the hallway and the man in the library, I wasn't taking any chances. The hallway outside the art room should have been empty and silent. It wasn't. As soon as I stepped through the doorway, I knew something was wrong. The building felt different, heavier somehow, like the air had thickened. A chill ran across my skin despite the warm September afternoon. The familiar smell of floor polish and old books was still there, but underneath it was something else. Something stale and wrong, like clothes left too long in a damp basement. And there were students walking through the halls. At first glance, it looked normal, teenagers with backpacks moving between classes. But school had ended over an hour ago. The only people who should have been around were those in after-school activities, and they would be in their designated rooms, not wandering the corridors. I stood frozen, watching them. They moved too slowly, their steps deliberate but somehow off rhythm. Their faces were too pale, with a strange bluish tint under the fluorescent lights. But what really made my stomach twist was their clothing. Some wore styles from the 90s, others from the 70s or 80s, and one girl near the water fountain was dressed in what looked like a poodle skirt from the 50s. None of them looked at me. They moved through the hallway as if following paths they'd walked countless times before, their eyes fixed straight ahead or down at books they carried. I needed to get out. Now. I turned toward the main exit, walking as quickly as I could without running. The hallway seemed longer than I remembered, stretching endlessly ahead of me. My footsteps echoed loudly against the wooden floor, but the other students made no sound at all. A hand grabbed my arm, yanking me sideways with unexpected force. I stumbled, nearly falling as I was pulled through an open doorway. The door slammed shut behind me, and I heard the distinct click of a lock. "Are you trying to get yourself killed?" Mr. Green stood in front of me, his normally calm face tight with concern. He looked different. His tie was loose, his hair slightly mussed, and there was an intensity in his eyes I hadn't seen before, not even when he'd confronted the boy in the uniform. I lost track of time," I stammered, my heart racing. "I was working on an art project and 3:14 to 3:16. He cut me off, checking his watch. "That's why the rules exist, Madison. That's why we made them." He moved to the windows that looked out into the hallway and quickly pulled down the blinds. "Stay away from the windows until it passes." "What's happening?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Who are those people out there?" Mr. Green didn't answer immediately. He moved around the classroom, which I now recognized as his history room, checking the windows and the back door that connected to a supply closet. Once he seemed satisfied, he stood in the center of the room, keeping his distance from all openings to the hallway. "Look at your watch," he said quietly. I glanced down. 3:15. "One more minute," he murmured. My curiosity overpowered my fear. I moved toward one of the windows, careful to stay to the side as Mr. Green had done. Pulling the blind back just slightly, I peered into the hallway. There were more of them now. Dozens of students moved through the corridors in that same strange, silent procession. A boy in a Letterman jacket from what looked like the 80s. Two girls with big 70s hair sharing a notebook. A boy in what might have been clothes from the 40s, his hair slicked back in a style I'd only seen in old photographs. None of them cast shadows under the fluorescent lights. They're all... I couldn't finish the sentence. "Students," Mr. Green said softly, coming to stand beside me, but careful not to look directly out the window. "Students who never left." "They're dead," I whispered, the word finally escaping. He nodded. "Between 314 and 316. The school belongs to them. It's been that way as long as anyone can remember." A girl walked directly past our window, her face inches from mine, separated only by the glass. She wore jeans and a sweater that could have been from any decade, but her skin had that same unnatural pallor as the others. Her eyes stared straight ahead, unseeing. "Why those exact times?" I asked, unable to look away from her. The original building was completed in 1889. On the first day of classes, there was a fire. It started at 3:14 in the afternoon, and by 3:16, the first student had died. A young boy who got trapped in a stairwell. Over the years, we've had other tragedies. A collapse in the West Wing in the 30s. A student who took his own life in the 50s. A bus accident in the 70s that took 6 seniors. He spoke matter-of-factly, like he was teaching one of his history lessons, but I heard the weight behind his words. "Every school has its history, Madison. Ours just happens to be more present than most." I looked at my watch again. 3:16. As if someone had flipped a switch, the hallway emptied. One moment it was filled with students from across the decades, and the next it was completely vacant. Just the empty corridor with its dented lockers and scuffed floors. Mr. Green let out a long breath. "It's over." He moved to the door and unlocked it, opening it cautiously and peering out. The hallway remained empty, now looking exactly as it should after school hours. "It's safe now," he said, his posture relaxing slightly. "But you should leave quickly. Just because the main event is over doesn't mean the building returns entirely to normal right away." I grabbed my backpack from where I dropped it when he pulled me into the room. My hands were shaking. "The other teachers, do they all know about this?" "Some do. The ones who've been here long enough. The ones who've seen things they can't explain away." He adjusted his glasses, his professional demeanor returning. "We look out for the students, the living ones, as best we can. That's why the rules exist. Not to scare you, but to protect you." I stepped into the hallway, half expecting to see traces of the ghostly students, but there was nothing, not even a feeling of cold or wrongness anymore. "They don't mean harm, most of them," Mr. Green said quietly as he followed me out. "They're just confused, lost, repeating the patterns they knew in life." He checked his watch again. "Always remember the times, Madison. 3:14 to 3:16. Never be alone in the building then." I nodded, clutching the strap of my backpack tightly. "I won't forget again." 2 days after my close call with the 3:14 phenomenon, I found myself sitting in the bleachers of Westlake High's gymnasium, watching our basketball team struggle against their crosstown rivals. The gym echoed with squeaking sneakers, the hollow bounce of the ball against polished wood, and occasional cheers from the modest crowd. I hadn't planned on attending, but Marcy had texted me that morning asking if I wanted to come. Normal high school stuff, she'd written. No ghosts guaranteed. Normal sounded good. After seeing those ghostly students in the hallway and learning about the school's tragic history from Mr. Green, I'd spent the last 2 days jumping at shadows and obsessively checking the time. My parents had noticed my distraction at dinner but seemed satisfied when I blamed it on new school adjustment. The gym was one of the newer parts of the building, added in the 1980s according to the cornerstone near the entrance. Maybe that explained why it felt different from the rest of the school. Brighter, less weighted by history. The air smelled of floor wax, sweat, and popcorn from the concession stand rather than the musty, ancient scent that permeated the older hallways. Marcy had needed to leave early to help her mom with something, but I decided to stay until the final buzzer. It seemed important to act like a normal student supporting my new classmates, even if everything about Westlake High was far from normal. Besides, the longer I stayed in the crowded, well-lit gym, the longer I could avoid the empty hallways and whatever might be waiting in them. Our team lost by 12 points, but the players and remaining spectators didn't seem too disappointed. Basketball season had just started, and from what I'd overheard, their real rival games wouldn't happen until after winter break. I waited while the bleachers emptied, taking my time gathering my jacket and purse. By the time I headed toward the exit, the gym had cleared except for a few players talking with their parents and the janitor starting to clean up. The hallway outside the gym was dimly lit, with every other fluorescent light turned off to save energy after hours. The crowd had disappeared quickly, leaving the corridor eerily quiet compared to the noise of the game. My footsteps echoed against the tile floor as I walked toward the main exit. I was checking my phone to text my dad that I was heading home when I heard the click of heels against the floor behind me. "Young lady, where do you think you're going?" I turned to see a woman I didn't recognize walking toward me with quick, precise steps. She wore a knee-length dress with a fitted waist and full skirt that looked straight out of the 1950s, along with sensible heels and horn-rimmed glasses. Her hair was styled in a neat, professional updo that didn't move as she walked. She carried a small stack of papers clutched against her chest. "The exit," I said cautiously, remembering the rules Marcy had given me. "The game's over." "That's not what I asked." Her voice was crisp and formal, each word precisely enunciated. "Students are not permitted to wander the halls without proper authorization after school hours." She stepped closer, and I noticed how her eyes seemed unnaturally bright under the fluorescent lights, almost as if they were reflecting more light than they should. "I'm Miss Patterson," she continued, "and I need you to come with me to the principal's office immediately." A chill ran down my back that had nothing to do with the hallway's temperature. Something about her felt wrong. The outdated clothes, the too perfect posture, the way she spoke like she was reading from a disciplinary handbook from decades ago. Rule number 6 flashed in my mind. Don't go with any teacher you don't know after hours, especially if they ask you to come to an empty office. "What's the disciplinary issue?" I asked, taking a small step backward. Miss Patterson's lips thinned with disapproval. "Your skirt length violates school code. 3 inches above the knee is simply unacceptable. Principal Chambers will decide your punishment." I glanced down at my jeans, then back at her. Her expression didn't change. "I need to call my parents first," I said, remembering Mr. Green's advice about always having an excuse ready. "They're expecting me home right after the game." Miss Patterson took another step toward me. "That won't be necessary. This is a school matter, not a family one. Come along now." She reached for my arm. I backed away quickly. "Sorry, but I really have to make that call. I'll check in with the principal tomorrow morning." Her face changed then, the professional mask slipping to reveal something desperate and confused beneath. "You will come with me now. Students must respect authority." Her voice had taken on a strange mechanical quality, like she was reciting lines she'd said thousands of times before. "I'm sorry, Miss Patterson, but I can't." I turned and walked as quickly as I could without running toward the academic wing. Mr. Green often stayed late grading papers. I'd seen him in his classroom when I was working on my art project. If anyone would know what to do about a teacher from the 1950s, it would be him. I heard Miss Patterson's heels clicking behind me, following at the same measured pace. She didn't call out again or try to catch up, but she didn't stop either. I turned the corner into the history department hallway and broke into a run. Light spilled from Mr. Green's classroom door, a beacon of normality in the darkened corridor. I rushed inside without knocking. Mr. Green sat at his desk, surrounded by stacks of papers, red pen in hand. He looked up in surprise as I burst in. "Madison? What are you—" "There's a teacher following me," I said breathlessly. "Miss Patterson. She wants me to go to the principal's office for a dress code violation, but I'm wearing jeans and she looks like she stepped out of the 50s, and her eyes are wrong. And I remembered Rule 6. Mr. Green was on his feet before I finished speaking. He moved past me to the door, closing it firmly and turning the lock. His face had gone from surprised to serious in an instant. "You did exactly right," he said quietly. "Stay here." He moved to the window in his door and looked out into the hallway. I stayed back, not wanting to see if Miss Patterson was still there. After a long moment, Mr. Green's shoulders relaxed slightly. He turned back to me. "She's gone," he said. "For now." "Who is she?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Mr. Green gestured for me to sit down. He removed his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose, suddenly looking tired. "Margaret Patterson taught English here from 1950 to 1953, he said. "She was known for being extremely strict about the dress code and school rules. She died in a car accident on her way home from chaperoning the spring dance. The road was wet, visibility was poor, and she missed a curve." I sank into a chair, my legs suddenly feeling weak. "She's another ghost. We prefer the term resident," Mr. Green said with a small, sad smile. "Some of our supernatural residents are aware of their situation. Others, like Miss Patterson, are caught in loops, reliving aspects of their former lives without understanding that they've passed on. She genuinely believes she's still a teacher with authority and responsibility." "She wanted me to go with her to the principal's office," I said. "What would have happened if I had?" Mr. Green's expression grew more serious. "Nothing good. At best, she would have led you around in circles, growing increasingly frustrated when she couldn't find an office that no longer exists as she remembers it. At worst," he trailed off, "let's just say that spirits who don't know they're dead can become unstable when confronted with evidence that contradicts their reality." He began gathering his papers, organizing them into a neat stack. "I'll walk you to your car. It's not safe for you to be alone in the building right now." "Is Miss Patterson dangerous?" I asked as he packed his briefcase. "Not intentionally," he said carefully. "But imagine the confusion and frustration of trying to do your job day after day while the world around you keeps changing in ways you don't understand. People ignore you, rooms aren't where they should be, and nothing makes sense anymore." He closed his briefcase with a click. That kind of confusion can sometimes turn to anger. We walked together through the empty hallways, Mr. Green staying slightly ahead of me, his eyes constantly scanning doorways and intersections. The building felt different at night, the shadows deeper, the silence heavier. "Why are there so many of them here?" I asked quietly. "I've never experienced anything like this before, and I've been in old buildings." Mr. Green nodded as if he'd expected the question. "Westlake isn't just any old building. The land it was built on has a complex history." He paused at a corner, checking the connecting hallway before continuing. "Before the school, this land was used as a quarantine area during the yellow fever epidemic of 1853. Before that, it was part of a plantation with its own troubled past." We reached the side door that led to the student parking lot. Through the glass, I could see my car sitting alone under a street lamp. Mr. Green pushed the door open and held it for me. The combination of emotional energy from so many young lives passing through these halls, coupled with sudden deaths over the years, has created something unique, he continued as we walked to my car. A sort of permanent connection between the world of the living and those who've passed. but haven't moved on. Most schools might have a ghost story or two. We have a community of them. We reached my car, and I fumbled in my purse for my keys. Is that why you and Mrs. Lottie and Ms. Trevors know how to deal with them? Why you created the rules? Mr. Green nodded, looking back at the school building. Light from within spilled out through the windows, making the old brick structure look almost welcoming despite what we knew existed inside. Every generation of teachers discovers the truth eventually, he said. Those who can handle it join our efforts to protect the students while respecting the residents who mean no harm. The rules have evolved over decades, each one written in response to a particular incident. I unlocked my car and opened the door, but hesitated before getting in. Thank you for explaining. And for walking me out. You're welcome, Madison, Mr. Green said. Drive safely. And remember, just because you now know why the rules exist doesn't make them any less important to follow. I nodded and slid into the driver's seat, watching through the windshield as Mr. Green waited for me to start the engine. As I pulled away, I glanced in my rear-view mirror and saw him still standing in the parking lot, his figure growing smaller as I drove toward the exit. The encounter with Miss Patterson had been frightening, but it was also the first time I'd met a spirit who wasn't immediately threatening, just confused and stuck in routines from a life that had ended long ago. I wondered how many others like her walked the halls of Westlake, going through the motions of lives they no longer had, invisible to most but occasionally breaking through to interact with the living. I arrived at school nearly an hour early the next morning, the memory of Miss Patterson's unnaturally bright eyes and clicking heels still fresh in my mind. Mr. Green had texted me last night after I got home, asking if I could meet him before classes started. I think it's time you understood what's really happening at Westlake, his message had read. The morning air was cool as I walked from the parking lot to the main entrance. Most of the spaces remained empty this early, with only a handful of teachers' cars scattered across the asphalt. The school looked almost peaceful in the soft morning light, its brick exterior and arched windows giving no hint of the supernatural residents that walked its halls. I found Mr. Green waiting in the main lobby, leaning against one of the trophy cases and checking his watch. He straightened when he saw me, his expression a mixture of concern and something that looked like approval. Thanks for coming early, he said, his voice echoing slightly in the empty space. Did you have any more encounters after I walked you to your car last night? No, I said. Just weird dreams about Miss Patterson chasing me through hallways that kept changing. He nodded as if this was an expected response. Your mind processing what happened. That's normal. He gestured for me to follow him. Come with me. There are some people I'd like you to meet. We walked past the administrative office where I'd first checked in on my arrival at Westlake. Mr. Green led me down a short corridor I hadn't noticed before, tucked behind the main reception area. At the end was an unmarked door that looked like it might lead to a supply closet. This used to be the original principal's office back when the school first opened, Mr. Green explained as he pulled out a key. Now it serves a different purpose. The door swung open to reveal a room that definitely wasn't being used for storage. It was roughly the size of a classroom but felt cozier, with a large round table at its center surrounded by mismatched chairs. Bookshelves lined the walls, crammed with old volumes, folders, and what looked like journals. A large corkboard covered one wall, pinned with maps of the school from different eras, newspaper clippings, and photographs. In the corner stood an old-fashioned filing cabinet with each drawer labeled by decade, starting with 1880-1900. Around the table sat several people who looked up when we entered. Marcy was there, which surprised me even though it probably shouldn't have. She gave me a small wave. Mrs. Lottie sat beside her cafeteria uniform replaced by a flowing purple blouse and jeans that made her look younger somehow. Miss Trevors occupied another chair, her auburn hair loose around her shoulders instead of in its usual tight bun. 3 other teachers I recognized but didn't know well completed the group. Mr. Abernathy, the elderly chemistry teacher who walked with a slight limp. Ms. Winters, who taught advanced math and always wore colorful scarves, and Coach Dillard, the young track coach who had started at Westlake the previous year. "Welcome to what we call the preservation room," Mr. Green said, closing the door behind us, though preservation might not be the right word for what we do. "More like containment and protection," Ms. Travers added, gesturing to an empty chair. "Have a seat, Madison." I sat down between Marcy and Mr. Green, feeling suddenly self-conscious with so many eyes on me. "So, this is some kind of secret society?" Mrs. Lottie laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "Child, we're just a group of people trying to keep students safe while respecting those who came before." "And sometimes after," Coach Dillard added with a wry smile. Mr. Green cleared his throat. "Madison, what you've experienced since arriving at Westlake isn't random. The boy in the uniform, the crying in the bathroom, the footsteps, Miss Patterson, they're all part of what makes this school unique." "Haunted," I said. "We prefer not to use that term," Ms. Winters spoke up, adjusting one of her colorful scarves. "It has certain negative connotations." Mr. Green nodded. "We've found that thinking of our supernatural residents as haunts or ghosts makes it harder to coexist with them peacefully. The truth is more complicated." He walked to the filing cabinet and pulled open the drawer labeled 1880-1900. "Westlake High was founded in 1889, he continued, extracting a leather-bound ledger. "The original building was much smaller than what stands today, just the central section and the east wing. From the very beginning, there were reports of unusual occurrences." He opened the ledger on the table in front of me. The pages were yellowed with age, filled with neat handwriting that had faded to a soft brown. Dates marched down the left margin with detailed entries beside them. "This is the journal of William Blackwood, the first principal," Mr. Green explained. He began documenting strange events within weeks of the school opening. Cold spots in certain classrooms, items moving when no one was present, students reporting seeing people in the hallways who weren't really there. I skimmed the entry he pointed to, dated October 23, 1889. Student M. Holloway reports seeing a man in outdated clothing near the east stairwell, described him as wearing old-fashioned farmer's clothes and having sad eyes. The land where the school now stands was once part of the Whitlock plantation. Could this be a former worker? Must investigate further. Then came the fire. Mr. Green continued, turning several pages. January 16, 1890. Started in the chemistry laboratory at exactly 3:14 in the afternoon. By 3:16, the first casualty had been confirmed. A 12-year-old boy named Thomas Willingham who got trapped in the east stairwell. The writing on this page was hurried and blotched in places, as if written with a shaking hand. God help us. Young Thomas could not be saved. The smoke was too thick, the flames too hot. By the time we reached the stairwell, it was too late. His poor mother arrived as they were carrying him out. I shall never forget her cries. A chill ran through me as I remembered the boy in the Navy uniform. Is Thomas the boy I saw? The one in the uniform? Yes, Mr. Green said quietly, though he doesn't remember his name anymore, or how he died. He just knows this is his school and he's supposed to be here. But why did he approach me specifically? I asked. Marcy spoke up for the first time. Some of them are drawn to people who can see them clearly. Not everyone can, you know. Most students and teachers go through their entire time at Westlake without noticing anything more than occasional cold spots or weird noises. You can see them, I said. It wasn't a question. She nodded. Since my first week here last year, that's when Mr. Green found me hiding in the bathroom after I'd seen Miss Patterson trying to give detention to an empty classroom. Mr. Green placed a hand on my shoulder. Those who can perceive our supernatural residents clearly are rare, Madison, and valuable to what we do here. Which is what, exactly? I asked, looking around at the group. We protect the living while respecting the dead, Mrs. Lottie said simply. This school exists in an unusual place, spiritually speaking. The land has history, layer upon layer of it, some peaceful, some violent. The school building itself has seen its share of tragedy over the decades. Mr. Abernathy spoke up, his voice raspy with age. The collapse of the West Wing in 1932. 7 students and 2 teachers. The chemical leak in my lab in 1968. The bus accident in 79. And individual tragedies too, Miss Travers added. Students and teachers who passed suddenly, sometimes within these walls, sometimes elsewhere, but whose connection to Westlake was strong enough to bring them back. We've developed systems over the decades, Mr. Green continued, gesturing to the filing cabinets. Each generation of teachers discovers the truth and adds to our knowledge. The rules that Marcy gave you, they're distilled from over a century of observations and incidents. He walked to the corkboard and pointed to a detailed floor plan of the school. Red pins marked specific locations throughout the building. We map activity, we document encounters. We learn which spirits are harmless, which are confused, and which are potentially dangerous. He turned back to face me, and when necessary, we intervene to protect the living students in our care. Like Mrs. Lottie did with her singing, I said, remembering how she'd protected me from whatever had been following me in the hallway. Mrs. Lottie smiled. Old spiritual songs have power against restless spirits. My grandmother taught me that, and hers before her. And Miss Travers with the man in the top hat, I added. Ms. Travers touched the iron bracelet on her wrist. Iron, salt, and a few words passed down through the library's special collection. Some of our methods are quite old, but effective, Coach Dillard added, though we're always looking to improve our response protocols. Mr. Green returned to his seat beside me. Madison, I'm telling you all this because you've demonstrated both the ability to perceive our supernatural residents and the good judgment to follow the protective rules. We could use someone like you in our network. I blinked, surprised. You want me to join your ghost hunting group? Spirit Preservation and Protection Coalition, Ms. Winters corrected with a small smile. We're not hunters. We're more like moderators, helping the living and the dead coexist in the same space without harm coming to either. Most of our residents aren't malevolent, Mr. Green explained. Thomas, the boy in the uniform, is just confused and lonely. Miss Patterson is stuck in her routines, unable to move on. They don't mean harm, though they can cause it unintentionally. And the dangerous ones? I asked. Like the man in the top hat. The mood in the room shifted subtly. Mr. Green and Ms. Travers exchanged glances. Some spirits do mean harm, Ms. Travers said carefully. Or at least they feed on fear in ways that can be dangerous to the living. Those are the ones we work most actively to contain and, when possible, help find peace so they can move on. What would I have to do? I asked. If I joined, I mean. Keep your eyes open, Mr. Green said. Report any new or unusual activity. Help new students understand the importance of the rules without scaring them unnecessarily. Occasionally assist with specific protective measures when we need extra hands. Like I do, Marcy added. It's not that different from what you've already been doing, just more organized. You don't have to decide right away, Mrs. Lottie said, her voice gentle. We understand this is a lot to take in. You can also choose to simply continue following the rules as a regular student, knowing what you now know. A movement in the doorway caught my attention. I turned to see the boy in the Navy uniform, Thomas, standing just inside the room. His form was less solid than when I'd seen him in the cafeteria, more like smoke shaped into a human figure. His eyes, those dark, empty pools, looked different now. Not threatening, but sad, deeply sad, with a loneliness that made my chest ache. The adults followed my gaze, and Mr. Green stood slowly. It's all right, Thomas, he said softly. Madison is with us. She's safe." The boy's eyes fixed on me, but there was no cold sensation this time, no feeling of being frozen in place. He looked young, just a kid who died too soon and didn't understand what had happened to him. Thomas nodded once, a small formal gesture, and then his form became less distinct, fading like morning mist until he was gone. "He's been watching out for you," Ms. Travers said, in his own way. "But he terrified me in the cafeteria," I said, confused. "He doesn't always know how to communicate," Mr. Green explained. "And sometimes when spirits try to warn the living about danger, it comes across as threatening because they're agitated." "Warning me about what?" I asked. The teachers exchanged glances again. "We believe he sensed something was taking an interest in you," Mr. Green said carefully. "Perhaps the entity you encountered in the library. Thomas has been at Westlake longer than any other resident. He seems to have developed a sort of protective instinct toward students he perceives as vulnerable." I thought about that for a moment, trying to reconcile the frightening figure in the cafeteria with the sad boy I'd just seen. It was hard to imagine him trying to protect me, but it made a strange kind of sense. "So the school isn't haunted in the way people usually think," I said slowly. "It's more like a community, living and dead sharing the same space." "Exactly," Mr. Green said, looking pleased. "Most of our supernatural residents are just lost souls who need guidance and boundaries. Not so different from our living students, really." That made me smile despite myself. "So, if I join your group, I'd be helping both the living and the dead?" "That's one way to look at it," Mrs. Lottie said warmly. I took a deep breath, looking around at the room with its century of records, at the teachers who had taken on this extraordinary additional responsibility, at Marcy who had faced this same choice last year. "I'll do it," I said. "I want to help." The relief on Mr. Green's face was obvious. "Thank you, Madison. We could use another set of eyes, especially ones that see as clearly as yours do." "Welcome to the team," Marcy said, bumping her shoulder against mine. "Trust me, school gets a lot more interesting when you're part of the spirit squad." "We do not call ourselves that," Ms. Winters said with a sigh that suggested this wasn't the first time she'd had to make this correction. "Not officially," Marcy whispered to me with a grin. Mr. Green stood and walked to a cabinet in the corner. "There are a few things you should have," he said, opening the drawer and retrieving several items. He placed them on the table in front of me, a small notebook with a black cover, a silver pin shaped like a shield, and what looked like an old-fashioned skeleton key. "The notebook is for recording any encounters or observations," he explained. "The pin is both a symbol that identifies you to other members of our group and contains a small amount of protective iron. And the key..." He paused. "The key will open any door in Westlake, including this room. Keep it with you at all times." I picked up the key, feeling its weight. It looked ancient, the metal worn smooth in places from countless hands. "Thank you," I said, though the words felt inadequate for the trust they were placing in me. "The first bell will ring soon," Mr. Green said, checking his watch. "We should all get to our regular positions. Madison, we meet here every Wednesday after school. Feel free to come to any of us with questions before then." As the group began to disperse, gathering their things and heading toward the door, I remained seated for a moment, looking around at the room that contained so much history, both of the school and its supernatural residents. I had come to Westlake expecting normal high school challenges, making friends, keeping up with classes, finding my place in a new environment. Instead, I'd found myself in the middle of something I never could have imagined. But for the first time since seeing Thomas in the hallway on my first day, I didn't feel afraid. Confused, yes. Overwhelmed, definitely. But the fear had been replaced by something else. A sense of purpose, maybe. Or belonging. I wasn't just the new kid anymore. I was part of something important. Something that mattered. I slipped the key into my pocket, pinned the silver shield to the inside of my jacket where it wouldn't be obvious, and tucked the notebook into my backpack. Whatever happened next, I wouldn't be facing it alone.